Who knows what happened with my brain on that lap, but autopilot it to significantly the fastest lap time.
In case you hadn't noticed, high pivot bikes are all the rage right now, and Deviate's Claymore is one of two that we have in for our Enduro bike field test in Bellingham, Washington. Taking its name from the massive two-handed Scottish sword, the 165mm travel Claymore gets a 170mm fork up front, 29-inch wheels, and a main pivot that sits nearly halfway up the seat tube. Other details include a threaded bottom bracket, externally routed cables that are hidden in a channel on the underside of the top tube before disappearing inside the swing arm. Deviate doesn't offer complete bikes, but you could pick up a Claymore frame and Fox Float X2 shock for $3,822 American. Now let's talk to the testers to find out how the new Claymore performed in Bellingham. All right, we've covered all the details for the new Claymore. We're gonna talk about this high pivot bike now and how it performs on the trail. Just like all the other videos, we're gonna start with climbing first. Kaz, this thing has an idler pulley. Tell me how it climbs.
It climbs well. I know you always think these idler pulley bikes. Yeah. Turns out you can make either equipped bikes climb very well. Yeah. Kind of similar to that Contra, the other high pivot bike we have. There's just not a lot of bob, no matter the gear you're in. So climbs well.
You'd agree with that too, Really should.
Yeah, I was actually really impressed by how quiet and composed the Climber it is. It's so calm on pretty much everything. It's really quiet.
Can you compare it to the Contra and how these two bikes pedal? They're both idlers. They're obviously very different, but how do they pedal comparing?
Yeah, actually both of them were surprisingly efficient surprising compared to what I expected going in. The obvious answer here is there's a huge difference in weight between the Deviate and the Contra, and that definitely contributed to the Deviate riding a little lighter, and I think it rides lighter than its 34.9-ish pounds would say. Both, however, sat fairly high in the travel, but had enough sensitivity to soak up some of the small bumps. The Deviate had a little less traction going up though.
Okay. And some of that could have been, we've had an air shock on the Deviate, and then the Contra had a coil. So this bike the Deviate is coil compatible. It'd be pretty interesting to try it with that, because that could even that out. But yeah, I agree, not quite the same level of traction as that Contra had.
I think the Deviate too, it's a pretty maneuverable bike for its length and its amount of travel. And sometimes that meant the front end, which is really easy to move around, which I think is a good thing, felt a tiny bit light, but it has a really steep seat angle that helps balance that out and makes it pretty centered overall.
That's got to really help when it's tight and slow and tricky as well, I would imagine, eh?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an easy bike to just put it right where you want it.
Yeah. Kaz, what bike, the Contra or the Deviate? You got a lot of climbing ahead of you. Obviously, you're going to pick the Deviate.
I'm picking the Deviate. Yeah, I mean, the Contra can get it done where the Deviate on a big, long, pedally ride, it definitely would be easier to get through that. Yeah. It's a little bit steeper head angle, just gives it a little bit quicker handling. So it's kind of falls into that not quite so single-mindedly focused on just going downhill all the time.
Yeah. Okay. It sounds like it hides its enduro-ness, if for lack of a better word, on those climbs. It sounds like it can handle that stuff pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. I'd put this one, we've said it way too many times, but it's gonna go in that all-rounder category, with the Patrol and the Fazari, those two bikes plus this one kind of make bikes that have a lot of travel, but you can do more than just go straight down the hill.
I think with the Enduro category though, it falls, for me, really neatly into the Enduro race category, where a lot of these bikes really focus on the descending portion. I think sort of sacrificing the climb, and people seem to forget that Enduro racing involves climbing too, and this is a bike that I'd be happy to spend all day pedaling.
Well, that's enough about climbing. Let's talk about going back down the hill. Kaz, I'm going to start with you. We're going to start with suspension performance. What did you make of this thing?
Yeah, again, these high pivot bikes, we talked about how they're just going to eat up the bumps. This one does it. And I think with the Deviate, it's less of a hammer. It doesn't just smash the bumps in the submission. It's got a nice little bit of energy to it, a little bit lighter feel. It could be due to the overall frame weight, maybe the air shock. So it's kind of has that smooth ride, but it doesn't feel like you can't change direction or do other things besides just plow down the trail. It's not quite as, doesn't have quite of a steep ramp up as some of the other bikes here. So that mid stroke, it's a little bit soft. So you don't quite have the support there, but I think that kind of is a kind of a two-sided thing where it does help it feel really calm and just kind of mutes things, but you don't get that, there's not as much to push against, but it does ramp up nicely in the end of the stroke, so there weren't any harsh bottom outs. You could probably tune some of that with a little bit of volume spacer work, but I think as we had it, kind of was a little bit more on the softer side, especially in the mid-stroke, but I think that helped with just making it feel like it just helped smooth out the trail.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on to handling. And when I see a high pivot bike with an idler, I suspect that it's gonna go really fast in a straight line, but maybe it might be a bit more work when you're in the tight, slow stuff. So is that the story with the Claymore?
I didn't think so. I think it actually felt fairly good at pretty much everything. It didn't carry quite the same straight line speed as some of the really long bikes as you'd expect. It gives up a tiny bit of stability, but it's by no means unstable. It's still a very stable bike and still allows you to corner just because it does have that agility feeling. I found the front end pretty easy to pick up and move around, and the back end followed the front end really nicely.
Kez?
Yeah, I think their numbers here, they didn't make it the slackest bike, which is, you can kind of go two ways to make a bike stable, but I think the fact that this has the rearward axle path kind of balances out the slightly steeper head angle. So you don't have a bike that can't turn, like it's stable, but it also is maneuverable. So they've struck a nice balance here. I think that it does give it something like we were talking about for being a race bike. This could be a great race bike because when you do get in tighter stuff, you can still maneuver it, but then it still feels totally solid when you're in more of a straight line, kind of go right down the fall line type thing.
Right.
This is a bike I genuinely want to race. Like, and I thought that from the first ride I got on. I was like, I want to take this to an enduro race. More
so than the Contra. We're going to do a bunch of comparisons in the roundtable, but because those are our two high pivot bikes with idlers, I'm sort of surprised. I mean, that Contra is so capable, but you would prefer the Deviate.
Yeah, I think for my personal riding style, I have a style where I really enjoy picking the bike up and moving it around just a little bit more. So I think I rely a little bit on just a little more lightness, not based on like objective weight, but based on the way the bike rides. And the Deviate for me struck that balance where it rides pretty lightly, but it also doesn't give up stability and doesn't ping off things.
Kaz, do you feel the same?
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, enduro races aren't all just straight down the fall line, even despite how they're portrayed sometimes. There are little spots where you have to sprint or it gets a little strange. And I think that's where we're starting to see bikes that are so downhill oriented that they kind of lose some of that ability to be easy over the course of a long day, where this bike, it does have that, there's an easiness to it that I really enjoy as well. Yeah.
So that's how the Claymore rides, but we're gonna talk about some of the components on this bike. And one thing that we should mention is that this is only available as a frame only. So you're not gonna buy the bike with these components, but regardless, we're gonna talk about the build kit and we're gonna start with the stuff that you liked, Alicia.
Yeah, so the highlight for me was the XT drivetrain. We tend to ride a lot of bikes with SRAM drivetrains, and sometimes I forget just how good those XT drives are. So XT drivetrain, consistent, solid, incredibly smooth shifting. I also got along really well with the Fox 38 and Float X2 suspension on there. I think it paired nicely with just how the bike operates. And then the one-up dropper post was very reliable and long enough, so that's worth a mention too.
As for lows, I think we have to talk about it again, even though I hate talking about it. The XT brakes, the rear brake, it just had an inconsistent bite point. It happens once in a while. Sometimes we've been having, more recently—
More than 50% of the time.
I don't know, more recently, it seems like they've been on a roll where they haven't been as inconsistent. So I'll say that.
Okay, yeah,
I'll go with that. So,
sure.
But this one, it just wasn't there. So that's an issue that occurs once in a while. Also the fabric saddles are a matter of personal preference, but I don't think any of us really got along with the shape. It's kind of more raised in the middle rather than having a depression. But again, if this was your own bike, you'd be building it from the frame only. So hopefully you put something nice and comfy on there.
Alicia, let's talk about times. How did this thing go for you?
This bike is the one I felt the best on, and it was unsurprisingly, but also kind of surprisingly, an outlier on the fast side by 3 seconds over the rest of the bikes, which is a lot. The rest were really tightly clustered.
It's the fastest bike by 3 seconds or whatever, but it's 10 seconds faster than the Fezzari over like a 2.5-ish minute course.
Yeah.
That's a long ways. That's a big gap.
Yeah,
you were way more comfortable on this Deviate.
I felt really good on it. It's interesting because there's a Deviate and then there's a really close cluster of all the rest of the bikes, and then there are a few more seconds, and then there's the Fezzari. So we have a fast outlier and a slow outlier. I don't know exactly what was going on there, but probably comfort level had something to do with it, despite my feeling like the Fezzari was an incredibly comfortable bike.
Kaz, let's talk about your times.
For me, it was the third fastest out of 7 bikes, but basically most of my times for the 4 of the bikes were clustered super tight, like down to the 10th or 100th of a second. But
Mr. Consistent.
I know, it turns out I can ride the same trail over and over again at the same speed pretty well. No matter what the bike's doing, I just go like this.
Bikes
Yeah,
same time.
Exactly. But it did feel like a fast bike, so it wasn't surprising that it was up for the, in the top part of those 7 bikes.
All right, we're gonna talk about models and pricing. I'm just gonna do this one real quick because there are no models and pricing. It's frame only. It's $3,822 with the Fox Float X2, which is cheaper than the Mega Tower, which is interesting because you have the Santa Cruz. There's a hell of a lot of Mega Towers out there. A Mega Tower frame is $4,249. There's way less Deviate Claymores rolling around, but it's quite a bit less expensive. Yeah. Strange.
Yeah, I don't know how prices work these days. Everything keeps getting more expensive, but it is pretty wild that a small company like this, their bike is less expensive than that Mega Tower.
We're gonna talk about pros and cons now. Alicia, I want you to tell me the pros. Tell me the good things that you like about this.
Yeah, I mean, the bike just works so well, particularly the suspension performance over those square edge hits and just the way the back wheel feels getting up and out of the way. I think it does such a good job of smoothing out the bumps, and that makes it feel like a really easy bike to ride, both at slower paces and at race pace.
It sounds to me like this thing has all the benefits of a high pivot without a lot of the drawbacks that we see on the other things, right?
Yeah, I feel like maybe the trial period of high pivot bikes is sort of ending, where people are figuring out how to make them so dialed and without the drag that at least Levy associates with high pivot bikes.
Kaz, cons.
Cons. I'm not going to mention the idler's being a con because we had no issues with it. I know you want me to, sorry.
Strong pro.
Yeah, I think cons, one of the ones was the cable routing. Cable routing is awesome. It's external underneath the top tube, which is sweet.
That in pro. It's so good.
Yeah, that's really good, except the dropper post still goes in the frame and they didn't use any foam tubing on it, so you get some rattle from that. Again, it's a frame only, so if you build this up, make sure to put foam around your dropper post cable and it'll be quieter. Otherwise, there's only 3 frame size options, so smaller riders probably out of luck with this. It's all 29-inch wheels and it's just medium, large, and XL. And then you also have the chainstays stay the same on all sizes as well. So again, no size specific chainstays here. So a few little limiting factors, more to do with the number of options rather than the performance of the bike as far as cons go.
All right, let's wrap this review up by talking about who the heck this bike is for. Alicia, you're gonna tell us that.
It is definitely for someone who wants to combine the benefits of a high pivot bike without really pigeonholing themselves into specifically something only for rowdy terrain. I want to read what Casimir wrote verbatim for a second. Someone who wants to live the high pivot life without losing versatility was his answer to that question.
What is the high pivot life?
I don't really know, but I feel like it's a state of being. Just like, I'm living the high. Yeah, exactly. People like to, the people that, there's a lot of hype around high pivots. Yeah. This has it, except that it lives up to the hype. Yeah. You're right. You're like, oh, this makes sense. I understand why they did that. So I think, and both of us agree that it'd be a great race bike. It could be, an enduro race bike. We could probably go on a whole other tangent of what a good enduro race bike feels like, but something that you're comfortable on all day long, going up and down. It doesn't take that much work, and that's where this thing is.
Yeah, the effortlessness really stands out. Like it doesn't feel hard to ride when you're tired, and you don't have to tell it that hard to get it to do the thing you want it to do. I think that's really important.
You guys like this thing?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're gonna wrap this review up. Let us know in the comments what you think of the Claymore and how much you like it if you've had a chance to ride it. And make sure to stay around because there's plenty more videos coming, including the roundtables, a huck to flat, impossible climb, and probably others that I'm forgetting. We'll see you there.